thinking about was like, if you're interested in AGI, what you're really interested in is like levels of power of intelligence, and like, and there the real question is like, what is the right measuring stick? That's kind of the $1 billion question, because everybody has their own benchmark, for an AGI model or for an AI model, and so that's an area of huge competition. You have the ARC AGI that's like, hey, we want to have more reasoning things. You have all kinds of other things that are more ordinary performance of LLMs. And anybody can come along and say, hey, I invented a new benchmark, and my thing is the best at that benchmark. And so this is a whole thing. So if you're, so that's an area where the benchmarks are clearly being iterated on. And more generally, if you start asking the question like, hey, should we be worried about this model as like being more powerful than the human mind? Or the more powerful than the entirety of all the human minds put together? That's something that Elon Musk sometimes says. And so you'd say, well, by what measure? Because if it was literal size, for instance, like this computer is bigger than all of the humans put together, you'd say, I don't care about that. I care about the computational capacity. And that size is not the right metric. But then you might ask, well, is the computational capacity actually what matters even? Like if it's running horrible algorithms, it doesn't matter how much computation you have if it's computing something in a horribly inefficient way. So we shouldn't be worried about it, despite the huge computational power of some computer somebody made. So that would be a way of saying that metric isn't quite good enough either. Yeah, Tyler.
I just wanted to jump in. You're reminding me that it seems like David Deutsch and I guess others have argued that AGI will not be sort of paradigm shattering as it is often portrayed, because they will just be people, and so we will get the benefits that we will get from having more people already, which is just more productivity and inventiveness and all that good stuff, but not some like splintering of the world order. But I kind of have not understood that, because they will be people, but won't they just be very, very fast people? And so won't they outcompete humans, and won't that be pretty revolutionary just in itself? This is maybe something we could debate here. I don't know, but I haven't really understood between the two extremes. It seems like that's where I find myself.
Yeah, I think, obviously you're going to have slower or faster hardware, and that would matter. But that's a somewhat separate question from whether or not like current algorithms are equal to our algorithms. And so there's this sort of question about what is the relative strength of human hardware compared to our silicon hardware, and what is the relevant or relative strength of our AI algorithms to the human algorithms that are running. Because some kinds of algorithm advantages will outpace hardware advantages. So you say, hey, this hardware is twice as fast, but the algorithm is 1,000 times faster. So I can run it on slower hardware, and that's fine. So don't be worried about the AI safety of this shitty algorithm on great hardware. So there's, it's not obvious. And I suspect that it's the case that the difference between current AI algorithms and the human mind is like not just a matter of like some 10x difference or something like that, but is like qualitative thing where like the AI system just is not going to be able to match us in certain important ways. But that's the question. So it's like, what is the metric? What is the way of analyzing these different, intelligent systems to understand what's their relative power? Is there even a single metric? We said, hey, this one is faster than that one. That's a simple metric maybe. But what if there's different types of speeds? What if there's different tasks you're working on, and this algorithm has a different sort of speed for each one, or a different metric of quality? So what if, when you're asking how intelligent are these two systems compared to each other, what if you need to actually be asking like not just about one metric, but like 5 or 6? Mm-hmm. There's, for instance, any algorithm that makes progress probably needs to be trying new things. So that's one type of activity. But then there's also this idea of variation and selection. The selection piece is a different part. So you at least have these two different pillars of an intelligent system, and you could have a system which is very good at novelty generation and very bad at testing, or vice versa.
And imagine even we have our AI currently has no real attention. that it has to be prompted by people to focus its attention. So there's no open-ended criteria for what it pays attention to. It's always bounded by a person. So a GI would have open-ended attention, we would assume, but you could have gradations of that, having some level of attention that you can direct yourself, or needing to have a person force it. So that's another area where we can evaluate.
You can always remove the person from the loop, but then the question is sort of, well, once you have the LLMs driving themselves, how much can they do on their own? And that's an area where people keep pushing things further and further in terms of how long you can let the LLM go usefully on its own, and it'll still be productive. One kind of question is that something where you can like sort of push it arbitrarily far? Like, is there a world in which the LLMs can go for a year, 10 years, 20 years, and you still come back and you go, oh, that guy, that LLM I left running for 20 years was actually doing something kind of interesting and useful that, hasn't been superseded or it hasn't gone off the deep end. Is that the case? Because you expect for somebody like, some famous mathematician like Donald Knuth, if you say he's just off on the reservation for, 50 years on his own, not talking to anybody, you probably would bet that he was doing something kind of interesting during that time. Mm-hmm. Or at least you would not be so confident to bet that everything he did thought about was boring.
And you'd also expect it to change. Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think the current expectation for LLMs is like, after about a day or two, they're off doing something crazy. Yeah. But anyway, so I think that's in terms of me thinking about a book to write and different areas of like where to start the AGI discussion. Part of that is about taking specific systems we know about, like humans and animals and AGIs or AI algorithms, and trying to compare them. But and then trying to figure out what the right criteria are there. You can also kind of step back and say, like, what if we don't look at any particular system, but just kind of ask a more abstract question, like just imagine, a physical thing like a rocket ship, and just ask what kinds of paths, what kinds of situations can lead to that thing. Like, we're not even imagining humans or evolution or AIs or anything. We're just like, how does such a thing come to exist? How could it come to exist? Maybe there are ways it could exist, be brought into existence very slowly. And, like evolution takes billions of years to do its thing. So what if there's like some really slow process which could produce it? Or what are like faster ways it could happen? So just thinking a bit more abstractly about, here's a destination in the sort of the space of all possibilities, a rocket ship or a CPU. Okay, how do you go from the Big Bang to that thing? Like, it's possible because we have an existence proof of these things, but what does it take? So I think that's like a more abstract question, perhaps. Mm-hmm. And that kind of gets me thinking of like, what is the space of possibilities? What is the way of moving between them? Maybe one way to frame the question also is like, there's a rocket ship, and then like a functioning rocket ship, and that's a very special object. And there's a bunch of other things roughly similar to it that are, non-functioning rocket ships that would blow up if you try to use them. What kind of processes are capable of like producing the functional one and not the others? Sort of, converging on this good thing. Like, that's a special object in the space of all objects. What kinds of things would either produce it, or produce it, focus on it, because it's possible that you have a world where everything that is possible happens. So in this world, you would produce the functioning spaceship and the non-functioning one and everything else. But there's something special happening when you're sort of have something in the universe that says, I'm going to make the functional spaceship and not everything else. Sort of taking this stab in the dark, very sharply pointed at this one special object, and not the others. I don't know if this is too abstract a framing that's kind of going off the rails, but trying to zoom out a little bit and say, we know about certain intelligent systems, but what if we take a zoom out and assume that we don't know about any intelligent systems, and ask just how do you get these special objects that are possible?
Mm-hmm. I'm still kind of wondering what your internal explanation is for personhood as opposed to non-personhood in a mind or in a program that a program is a person when what? What's your working fill in the blank there?
Uh, yeah, I think the question for me is not so much like what is a person. I guess my rough thing would be like a person is the most powerful type of intelligent entity. And so now I will forget about the idea of what is a person and just ask what is the most powerful type of intelligent entity. And then that goes again back to this question of, well, how do you measure the power of intelligence?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're already assuming there's something to be measured there. But I mean, like, so from, like Deutsch would say, explanatory universality, and to me, maybe we've talked about this before, but does tractability come into it at all for you? Because it seems like we all, I guess, agree that speed is not really a metric, um, in some
Well, it's not
sense.
clock speed that matters. Like the hardware speed is just one kind of thing, but it's the algorithm that really matters, I think. Um,
But even algorithmic, you can have a super algorithmically slow person, but that's still a person too, right? I mean,
but the question is, yeah, what is the software? Software is not fast or slow. Like it's there, and then you have to run it on some hardware. Um, but the core nature of all the causal relationships of the program, that's just there, regardless of whether you run it or not. Yeah.
hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. But I think, yeah, I just think it's interesting to kind of zoom out and say, well, yeah. So one kind of question is about the types of intelligent systems that could exist and how they compare to each other in terms of power. And so you can kind of, at the one end, if you're interested in AGI, ask like, what is the upper end of that spectrum? Or is there any upper end? Is like, does it just keep on going forever? I think that's one kind of question. Because if you view intelligence as this sort of continuous quantity, then maybe you can just keep increasing it, and there's no limit to intelligence. Whereas I guess I would prefer to say there is this upper limit to something. There's no upper limit to the kinds of knowledge that you can have, but that's a separate question from like the ability to create knowledge. And so it's like a Turing machine that's universal. Like there's nothing above that. You can obviously produce larger and larger and more sophisticated programs to run on it. And that can go on without limit. But as far as that machine itself, once it can compute everything, that's that. And so I think that's the analog for what's happening with the most powerful form of intelligence. But you could push back on that and say, hey, maybe that's not how it is. So you can query like what is the structure of like the upper part of the intelligence spectrum? Like is there a limit? Is there not a limit? You just hit a wall of universality and that's that, or is there something else that goes on continuously? And then you could also go back to the other end of the spectrum and say, hey, what's like the lowest limit of intelligence, or what's the gradient from like a dumb rock to like something slightly more intelligent and so on. So you can look at both ends of the spectrum and kind of see what does it really mean for something to be really intelligent, and what is like the boundary between like totally unintelligent and then having like a little bit. So I think that's fun to look at both ends.
You could say at least that if there's a system that is capable of solving all possible problems, it could be a person, right? That's a fair starting point. And whether or not that's the best, most efficient version of that system is not super important. But if it can solve all possible problems, right? And that would be like on par with the most powerful knowledge creation systems, but presumably it could always become more efficient. And that at least would be, a person that would be capable of being a person. So, if you want to keep on that question about personhood.
Yeah, I guess I'm so like I guess I reduce all the questions to just capability, like for my
Okay.
purposes, and then everything else is sort of like a consequence of it. Like so, you'll say, this is like we have these moral concerns, like, but you have those moral concerns because the thing has these other capabilities. And you just so I think the capability is sort of the starting point for everything else.
Mhm.
Uh,
But Tyler, you also had a question earlier about why not be afraid of AGI, and David Deutsch kind of has that idea. Um, I think of three things immediately. It's just that people can be interested in different things. So even if we all have the same capacity, or if other people have more capacity, doesn't really matter. We can be interested in different things. So in that sense, not too much of an issue. Fine.
Hmm.
Uh, another part is that a lot of scientific tests, I mean, a lot of tests at all, take time.
Oh yeah.
So there's not there's not that much of a speed up when you have to, build something or you have to actually do a test.
Yeah, there's a lot of friction in the system, so to speak.
Yes,
Only for non-software tasks, though.
exactly. Yeah, true. And then also, if you have a AGI that's extremely efficient, it'll probably, I mean, it'll be able to create other systems that are not AGI, which it can use that are very efficient. And then people would also be able to use those systems that are very efficient. AGI will create a calculator and we can use the calculator too,
Yeah,
that type of thing.
I agree with that. Did you say you have three? Was that three things?
That was three, yes.
Okay. And the first point about the interest, yeah, I get what you mean. There's sort of like no limit on the amount of diversity of thinking. But if we're talking about like tens of billions of AGIs entering the workforce, I feel like they will just, swallow up software engineering just by there being so many. And, even if only 1% of them are somewhat interested and want to make money, and they'll just be so good at it, I would think. But point taken otherwise. Um, yeah.
By the
I
way, if
guess.
you have something which is not really a person and is just an efficient algorithm, then then it doesn't necessarily change the role of the human that much. You'll still be like, well, what the human wants is now something that our algorithms can provide quickly. And so it's like nowadays, like people's measure or their base expectations for the quality of a product can just go up now. Like I have a friend who only programs occasionally, and now they're making interactive essays with a couple of Claude code prompts. And okay, so that was something that it takes you a month as a sophisticated programmer, or a weekend to put together something like that. Like DistillPub was a website where they had these interactive essays explaining neural networks and things like that. And that was like, pushing the envelope of publication, the nature of publication, and saying, hey, the papers are outdated, PDFs are outdated. Let's have a real document for the modern era. And I think they closed that down at some point as like, it takes a lot of effort to put those together. And, we didn't fully get a business case going forward or whatever it was. It was tough to put together these kinds of documents. And now that's the kind of thing that you just ask for it and you get it. It's not perfect. It's not that everything is trivial, but now it's orders of magnitude easier to do that thing. And so again, like if you have a really capable set of agents that still are not people, then you're just sort of raising the bar for what people want. And pretty soon, I feel like people are just like, I'm not worried about an apocalypse. I'm just getting more of what I want.
I'm wondering, I'm working on a science fiction story myself, and the main character has an AI assistant. I'm still trying to figure out if they should be a person or not, because then that brings up all the questions of, uh, they shouldn't be slavishly doing, what the main character is asking of them unless they want to, or are they paying them? And I've wondered, given that personhood is just a property of programs, it could be enabled and disabled maybe, by the millisecond. And it sort of allows for some good cosmic horror where you have an AI and a certain type of task is presented to it, and it's like, okay, well, we'll raise it into personhood for 150 milliseconds so it can perform this creative task, but then we're going to disable the personhood again, so it goes back to being AI. So it brings in this interesting question of like, you can have a rapidly changing personhood, and what is the experience like? It would just be highly disjoint, I guess. So I don't know. That's just what came to mind. Maybe you all can help me make that artistic and philosophical decision, or just in general. Yeah, can we have assistants? Can we have? I guess all the same rules of people apply as far as job roles, but yeah, could personhood be enabled and disabled super quickly? And
Yeah.
in what way is that
You-
immoral? Presumably.
You'd have to come up with an explanation for why the assistant would be okay with turning off its creative part and going back into non-personhood, I think would be the main struggle.
Or it's forced, so that's the horror part. But I, I think it's an interesting concept. I also think that kind of as we're saying, like a person is the most powerful knowledge creation system. So I would just say flat out, to ever stop that would be irrational. So, whether we translate that to being moral, which I think it would be fair to say it's immoral to do, but we can just start with the fact that it's irrational. If there's something that can solve any problem and even find its own problems to solve, it's
Yeah.
just irrational to stop that.
But
Yeah,
that's
I
not the
guess.
problem, though, of selecting a person to work for you because you have many people to work for you potentially. And so it's choosing among them. And one of them is better at solving your problem than another. So that's a choice. You actually
And I
choose.
guess I was imagining it as sort of a safety, precautionary principle type thing of the type that's flaring up these days. Like you don't want to let it be a person for too long. They might get ideas, type of
Well,
bad reasoning.
but that point there is interesting, and so I'm most interested in how do you make a person, like how do you make a system that's powerful and has the qualities that human minds do. But I think if you're interested in building tools, then you almost want to do the opposite. You want to know what it takes to make a human mind or a powerful mind, so that you don't accidentally create it and then put it in a box and make it a slave. So you want to, if you're interested in immortality, know how to make minds that you can back up and store and all that kind of stuff. So that's what you want for people. But if you want to make tools, then you also want to know, exactly how not to make a person accidentally. And so, if you don't know what makes a person, then maybe you'll accidentally make one. But before I forget, I should also say that on this subject of having a sort of an AI assistant, there may be a person that you turn on or off or whatever. There's, I guess, two things that you might want to look up. One of them is The Age of M. I don't know if you maybe already know about that one. Robin Hanson wrote a book. It's like very pessimistic. That kind of looks at a world where there's emulations, digital emulations of humans, some of which are better than others, and good hires, and so they get copied and live up what seems like a pessimist or a bad sort of life that involves the kinds of things you're mentioning. So I think that's when I heard about that book, it made me want to think, what is like the morally better version of that, where things don't go down some dark alley? What could that look like? So that's one thing, Age of M. And then secondly, there's also a show called Pantheon. And
I'm watching that. Yeah.
yeah. So that comes up there as well.
Yeah. You reminded me. Oh, what was that?
Good show.
Is it a good show? I get, it's okay. I don't know. It's sort of, I guess, for the uninitiated, in as far as mind uploading and AI and stuff, it's good. But I sort of feel like I can see the tricks coming a bit, having thought about the space. But you just reminded me of like 5 different things, Carlos, with that stuff you were saying. One idea was, we were just talking about personhood flickering, so to speak. I'm wondering if maybe that is actually already happening with us. We are actually not, we're not conscious, constantly throughout the day. Maybe we're only occasionally conscious. I wondered about that. I mean, not just like going to sleep and stuff, but
Can I just interject with one thing that you reminded me of as well? Like, we'll get the stack going here of exponential triggerings. There's a place in San Francisco called the Exploratorium that's very cool. And one of the things they have there is a slow motion camera where you just like press a button and then like you make a funny face and then it plays it back to you in like 10, 100x slow motion. And I remember like doing that and I press the button and I'm like, oh, I'll do like this face and then a crazy smile or something. And so I'm pressing the button, I'm having that thought, and then I see the thing happening in front of me. And I'm seeing the face, but what I'm really thinking about is the fact that I was having the thought in this 1 second interval, and in my personal experience of that moment was, I'll do a smile or whatever. I'm having whatever feelings I'm having over that 1 second. But then I'm seeing that 1 second of thought and feeling stretched out into 10, 20, 30 seconds. And I'm just like, So at this particular halfway through that, I'm thinking, smut, smut.
Yeah.
So just this weird, almost imagining your neurons and like your own personal experience stretched and slowed to that kind of.
Yeah. So that could be Well, that reminds me of another thing, unrelated to the things I was previously reminded of, where, we just talked about how AGIs will be able to be as fast or slow as they want. And so, they could be slower than us. And so it would sort of be like that comparison you just described, where thinking about two different things, but, I guess you wouldn't happen to have the same thought, whatever that means. But it made me wonder is maybe, although the AGIs will be able to be much faster if they want to, they might converge to our sort of same speed of processing in some constant measure. I don't know, it would be flops or something, because the most stimulus on Earth, the most interesting stuff is happening at Homo sapiens scale. If they made themselves super fast, we would all be basically frozen or moving in super, super slow motion. That would be a very boring world if they're wanting to be interacting with Earth, which they may
Then
not.
again, you could go on a speed retreat. Like some people will say, I'm going to take all my friends, go to some island. You just go, say, I'm going to take all my good friends and we'll go 10x speed. Like we don't really care that much. Everybody else is boring.
Yeah. But it's just interesting. I guess among the AGI that want to be interacting with Earth, I would think they'll converge to person-like time, because that's where the most knowledge formation is happening. So that was just one thought I had. But yeah, you raise another point, which is maybe clock speed will be like the new currency, because you'll have you need more compute to go faster, and then the poor, you can be as quote unquote poor as you want, but then everyone else is evolving much more quickly with respect to you. And I don't know, I feel like there's a good sci-fi that can happen there. I'm reminded of Permutation City, also by Greg Egan. I don't remember if it was you that recommended that to me, but lots to talk about there.
There was a Greg Egan story where it wasn't even about AIs, but it was about people who had adjusted their biology so they could like freeze or move very slowly. And there was a planet of people who had sort of their social agreement was, whenever somebody leaves the planet, if they were to come back and like if everybody was just act normal and somebody left the planet and go to visit another planet, they would experience like this relativistic slowdown thing. And so when they got back, they would be the same age roughly, and they would have experienced one day, but all their family would have experienced a year or 2 years. So they said, we're going to agree and adjust our biology so that like when you leave, you experience the 1 year, but we'll also slow down. So we only experience 1 year. So we'll all enter hibernation to some degree. And then when you get back, we'll all pick up where we left off. And so that's a version of it that doesn't involve the AI, but it does involve trying like this time syncing and the cultural, how the culture handles that.
Yeah, that is cool.
And then some kids are like, fuck this. I just want to live normal rate. I don't want to slow down for Jimmy who left the planet. Fuck him. And then they get in trouble.
Yep. Well, one of the other things this reminded me of is you mentioned backing up people, ourselves. I'm wondering, does consideration need to be made of how to not have the backup be a different person, a clone, who then has their own rights? So how do you back yourself up without the backup being, a second person that maybe doesn't want to be frozen and, reanimated at some time? And so do you have to like fragment your backup so that they're not, the different pieces are not in contact, so that it's not a person? And then if you get hit by a train, then okay, summon the backup, and then you bring the pieces together, and only then it has the human rights? Or does that not count? Quote unquote, it already had the rights because it was separated and on different servers, it was still a person. I don't know. There's lots
I feel like if you put the brain on you just store the bits, then it's not experiencing anything. In the same way that if you froze a human body and there was no changes happening.
Right.
Yeah.
But
you have to instantiate it for it to be a person. Like personhood is a process. It's not just a set of data.
But then by that reasoning, a frozen person is not a person. Right? So doesn't that not work?
Well, at some point you have to distinguish between like doing definitions and talking about like the real problems, which is like, is this entity suffering? Are they having choices that they are being prevented from making? Like, are you being coerced in some way and having these are the things that are the actual problems, not the definition of is person, not person.
Right.
And so ultimately,
yeah, it's not the definition, but it is the real status. I mean, the backup is either a person or not. A person if someone pauses your running, you're not like, oh, it's not a person anymore, so I can just destroy this substance. That was easy. Like obviously, a frozen person still has their personhood because they have the potential for the personhood stuff, whatever it is, universal explanation synthesis. So I think pausing and playing doesn't get us out of the problem. I think you have to do the back in a way that it is not causally in contact or something like that.
But I think if it has to have at least, some runningness, if it is just a snapshot of you at some time, it has never experienced personhood.
And that's true of us picosecond by picosecond, though.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing to think about is the idea of there's like a general question, I think, also that's applies not only to whether you should freeze a brain, but also to what sorts of communication you would engage in, which is, I have all this information in my brain right now. What kinds of changes am I okay with and which kinds am I not? Like if you just say, hey, Carlos, I'm going to cut out the right half of your brain and replace it with a bunch of other stuff I made up. I'm like, I'm not okay with that change. If you're like, hey, I want to talk for a few minutes in this call, which will change parts of your brain. Like, if you say some stuff to me, who knows what'll happen? I could become suicidal all of a sudden. Like these are risks, whatever. But I'm okay with this thing. Like there's a culture of communication with people that you get along with, and that's fine. So we've evolved into the situation where this particular interchange of bits I have consented to and continue to consent to and whatever. And you can tell that I could leave the call if I was unhappy. So there's this whole structure there. And so I think you can apply the same thing to communication in general and freezing. And so the real question there is sort of like, evolving to a situation where if something that would be analogous to that idea of leaving the conversation, like, can you be unfrozen if you want? And maybe like one way to think about it also is, it's one thing when you talk about backups, but what if there's also only one instance of you? And this is also happens in Greg Egan's Diaspora book, where people will be like frozen and they're part of this culture that is put on a ship, and they can choose when they want to be woken up, if ever. And so they say, in the story, they get copied 100 times, sent all over the universe, all over the galaxy. And some of them say, like, only wake me up if we meet intelligent life. Otherwise, I don't give a shit. Or any life, or whatever. So they define their own conditions for being woken up. And that's not about backups exactly. That's copies, or even if you have only one instance of you, you're defining the conditions on which you wake up. So again, that seems to me like you're taking into account some notion of consent and this kind of decision making.
Yeah, I guess, with a backup, that backup is identical to what you were at the time of backup. And if, like, going into it, you had some consent of not using that backup unless some conditions are met, that was sort of the decision of that person, if it is a person.
Yeah, maybe that does work. So if I'm saying, I'm what the backup is going to be, and I'm saying, don't wake me up. I don't know. I'm not sure. Like if I say, I don't think I can say now, so the two clones you make of me, you can kill one of them. I'm consenting to that. But I want to be alive, though. The other one, keep alive. I'm not sure that counts. We're giving consent on behalf of someone who doesn't exist yet, then. Sure that.
Well,
But I feel like the
happens when you
difference
create a new
is
person
if
also.
the clone is awake. Say you had two, like you were made unconscious and a clone was made of you, and the decision was to like reanimate one of them. It's a very different situation than if both of you woke up and then you decide to kill one of them who doesn't want to be, because now they have had the opportunity to change their mind.
I don't know.
Yeah. Interesting wondering, for instance, if you have a situation where two copies wake up or something, is it the case that there's like easy merging available? And like, so each one of you would face this question of, okay, you can either merge and go back to the way it used to be, which may be easy and fine if you've only been in existence for a second, and or a week or something. Or you can keep on carrying your own life, in which case you're going to split your net worth and whatever. And by the way, you have to convince your girlfriend to split up two and into two. It gets complicated, and people would say like, you live in a world where other people are also making their own decisions, and they're not just going to split because you did. So, pick, and maybe that you're like, shit, I don't want to merge, but I do prefer it to these other things, and that's the real decision I have before me. So, pick away.
I know in the book Old Man's War by John Scalzi, in it they like create clone bodies for people to make them younger, and part of the transfer process is somehow they connect the two consciousnesses, so they're thinking with both bodies at the same time, and then they shut down the old body while the connection is happening, leaving just the new body, so there never is like an orphaned branch that is killed.
Cool. Yeah, these are the considerations. There's like a whole new type of morality and law making and engineering that has to happen to like do the moral quarantining and stuff that's needed. I'm also wondering, like, you could back up just your knowledge. If the person is only the thing that's synthesizing the new knowledge, it's like the wavefront. I kind of like to think of it rather than everything behind the wavefront. You could have all your knowledge, everything static backed up, which is not the person. And then is there just like, can you just use any old personhood off the shelf, personhood specification, and then just put that on top of the knowledge, and then that's you again, because it's personhood algorithm or personhood program versus or plus all the knowledge that I had? Or is it somehow you can't separate the personhood like that? I don't know.
I don't
I would think
you
it's
can
both.
separate things quite that easily, yeah. Because I think that on the one hand, you could do that at the level of like the computer. Like it just runs any program, whatever. Like, okay, you can shove anything on. So there's a really clean break between the hardware and the software in certain cases. And yet in other cases, no. Like you and I could have the same set of facts in our brain about World War II or something, but then have totally different sets of relevance and connections among them. And so you'd have to take that into account as well. And in some case, we might have gone through the same class, but the relationship of ourselves to that idea, the relationship of all these ideas to each other could be radically different.
But then that's just extra knowledge. And to Tyler's point, if we back up all that extra knowledge as well, then it's a complete, like it includes the facts and your relationship with the facts and your reflections on like all of it. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
I think go ahead.
Or I guess the question is not so much, can you back up a brain? That's like, okay, yeah, for sure. The brain consists of information. You can back up information. But right. I guess the idea here is what is separable? Can you say like, I'm going to take Carlos's explicit knowledge and then take everything else in the brain and just swap it out with something else? So the question is, I guess, ultimately, what is the relationship between all the things in your head, and which parts of these are sort of commoditized and you share with everybody else, and which parts are unique to you? And so at some point, if you say, hey, like everything in your brain is kind of unique to you, like it's all connected up in a very peculiar way that is reproduced in no other brain, then you'd say, well, actually, the only thing that I can say that is common to all our brains is that they all consist of neurons. And they all use the same ions to communicate and blah, blah, blah. But beyond that, it's all different. So there's no replacing like the broader structure of my brain with yours.
Right.
I feel like there is some like the boundary, like the mind exists in parts of the body, not just the brain. Like there are interactions between the brain and body that affect our thinking. Hormones and neurotransmitters.
I wondered about that.
Copying your brain and say putting it into a different body might not give you quite the same personality because your mind is in an interaction with the brain and the body.
Yeah, I wondered about the whole body question as far as backing up. And I guess like the brain and mind are downstream, or not just downstream, they're upstream and downstream of the body. So if you're cutting out the body, what do you lose? I mean, I think you could still do it, but yeah, the question is like, how impactful would that be? Or do you not need to consider the body if you just like scan the brain enough to sort of get, the image of whatever the body is, however it's responding? Maybe that's not possible.
I think there's one question is about like, people will say, obviously the body affects you. Like if you get the flu, you'll think different. But that's probably common to most people. So you could just copy your body into your brain into somebody else's body. You'd still be you and also affected by the flu as everybody is. But there's a separate question about, okay, but your specific body though, like, is there something in your gut literally that is different for me and would affect your answer to some question or how you feel about something? And there, I think it's interesting because the answer could be yes, but the answer could also be like not very much. And you could just maybe step back and say, what kind of information can you store in a gut? And just take a look at it as a computational system. You'd say, hey, I'm going to look at the human body, including the brain and the gut, as a computational system in the same way that I would look at a CPU with, connections to a very fast memory cache and then, all these different things, including a hard drive somewhere 1,000 miles away. And just say, I'm going to just analyze what are the relevant components of all that stuff. What is the relative power of that hard drive that is not even connected to the system or barely or once a month compared to the thing that's referring to consistently? And what is the information capacity of this distant hard drive? If it can only store like 10 bits, like I suspect is true of the gut, it's not going to be storing gigabytes worth of useful information that you can refer to, then its contribution is going to be pretty minimal, I would think.
Or does the mind and knowledge base already contain all the programs for how to respond to all the hormones and all their different cases? And so we can't.
I guess it's a question of, do the differences in the body really matter, or does it just, the brain's functioning requires a body, and a body should appropriately respond to signals that the brain sends by increasing hormones and blood flow and all of the stuff that bodies do.
This is analogous to junk DNA, by the way, where there's a question first of, does the junk DNA do anything? And the answer could be yes. But then the second question is, does it do different things depending on the specific letters in the sequence? And the answer to that might be no. And so likewise here, it could be that the gut does matter, but it doesn't. The specifics of the gut arrangement don't particularly matter. You just need one.
Right. But a lot of this is still a matter of attention. Like there's all of it's knowledge. All of these things are knowledge. Everything's knowledge, right? So you have, as Carlos said earlier, in a conversation, you want certain things to be changed in your knowledge base, and you don't want other things to be changed. Like you don't want your ear to be cut off in the middle of a conversation. That's knowledge that you want to preserve. So in the sense that I'm saying attention, you're saying, I don't want that to vary. I do want this to vary. But it should be open-ended. So as a person, you can define whatever you want to be a part of the person. You can say, I want my body to not be varied, and I want everything else to be, a variable. My mind can change all at once, but the body's going to be the same. Or you can do the opposite and say, I want my mind, my brain state to be stable, but the body can be flipped out anywhere. Or you can, have any different gradations of that. I want my hair to be the same, but the gut doesn't matter, and so on and so forth. It's all knowledge, and it's all based on your attention, which is, what you're allowing to vary and what you don't want to vary. And that's all open-ended. So a person can define it themselves.
Yeah, I mean, so it definitely could just be a mind in a vat, and then you can just simulate everything that's happening from the body. But it's just a question of what needs to be scanned first to get there. Like, are we losing all the information, or can we just recreate that easily? Or would we be totally psychotic and suffering if we were just pulled from the body? I don't know. I mean, when we have like out-of-body experiences on psychedelics, it's traumatizing, but it's like not non-recoverable usually. It's I don't know, interesting thing about it. I'm not sure if that addresses it.
Ultimately, there's just a question of like how well you simulate the body. Because if you have a really good simulation, then by definition, you're not having any out-of-body experience. You wouldn't even know about it unless there was more of an existential thing of like, hey, by the way, you're in the Matrix right now. And then that concept freaks you out, which is entirely possible, but that would be a separate thing. Going back for a second to the idea Zachary was talking about, and just this broader question of what kinds of changes are you okay with? What kinds of interactions with other people and so on? And that's an open-ended thing, and that's all true. I think one area that it's interesting to consider is like types of media that would exist in the future. Because right now, I can write things down, I can make videos, I can make interactive explainers. What I can't really do is like make a program that will look at your brain, analyze everything you know about World War II, and start rearranging it all in a way that you would actually like. For instance, like imagine a world where I just know I can just run this thing, understand all your background knowledge and all of your explicit ideas about it, and I'll say, I can tell you're really interested in Winston Churchill's decisions on this and this and this, and here's like a full download and like a full mindscape where you can just explore. You can just be a fly on the wall in that room that's reconstructed, and this all happens instantly. Like maybe we're having a conversation and we all pause for a second and experience this so without anybody having to say any words. But somehow your little intuitions are picked up by this program that we're running together that says, okay, like I can tell what all of your interests are right now, and we'll dive into that virtual reality. So you can imagine people constructing arbitrarily interesting and interactive objects, making use of arbitrarily sophisticated information about you, including what your neurons are doing right now, or your whole set of published writings or whatever, and you getting a benefit out of that. And there would be this question, you'd say, hey, do I want to go to a rave that I plug in my neurons and have this World War II experience, or is that too intense for me? Is that like the psychedelics of that era where you say, it's too risky? Yeah, some people will have different views.
I suspect that it'll never be possible to insert information directly. Possibly we could have like a virtual reality that feels real, but I suspect we couldn't implant memories where you remember an event that you don't like in some time period experience.
Yeah.
Because I
agree.
think that it's too distributed, like, and that our brains are sort of live wired. We like what these neurons do isn't the same in my brain as your brain, like what specific neurons do. So there is no universal code to say translate a thought from your brain into my brain.
Right.
But I think there's a world where you could put you get 10,000 people and say, hey, watch this movie or watch this 5-second clip. And we just look at the before and after. And at some point, if we had a real full high resolution, high temporal resolution, spatial resolution, everything of your brain at the level of every bit, and I could say, okay, I see that what happens is like the Obama neuron has to be connected to the steak neuron, and then that's how you get the joke of the video. And so I'll just implant that directly in the guy, and he'll tell me via all questions that he remembers the video. Like I could see that that's the case where you have to understand your brain, but then I can convert this experience into that. It's not at all obvious to me that would be impossible.
Yeah, I'm with Carlos on this one.
Wait, I'm not sure I followed because I thought it was bucket theory to, we can't just insert something directly because all the knowledge in the brain came about through creative evolution, which is not reducible. So to put some bit of knowledge in, you have to have it go through that process again. So in that sense, we can insert it. But
yes, but in this case, you're doing the creativity to figure out what the knowledge would end up looking like in this person's brain, and then putting that finished product in there. So then they would be fooled, perhaps not, perhaps they might be aware of this experiment into being like, oh, I have this memory.
Yeah.
Or it might not even be super duper creative. It could just be a passive thing, but I guess it's never really that passive. You're always creatively engaging with it. Sorry, anyway.
No, but yeah, I think here's the thing that you can't do that's more in line with I think what you're thinking, Tyler, because there is this problem of there is something a little bit weird here. And I think what it is it might be possible for me to like trick your brain into thinking that it recalls it was at a certain place at a certain time. But there is a whole different thing, which is, could I predict what your brain would do if shown this clip? Because maybe you're one person that doesn't have the same experience everyone else does. They don't find it funny at all. They're thinking of some traumatic experience from their past that nobody else has. So there's all these associations that you might have that are totally unpredictable, unless I've run like a full simulation of your brain. But short of that, I don't know that there's some weird corner of your brain that would react strongly to this. So I'm putting in this thing that is true of everyone. There's this mental image, but I'm skipping over what may be 1,000 other contributions from the rest of your brain that I have no idea how to simulate unless I fully mapped it all out and simulated
What
every
was that? What is that true of everyone idea? What are you thinking would be true of everyone?
So suppose that it was as simple as having 20 neurons and all their interconnections between each other strengthened and then attached to some date in the brain, or whatever, some kind of mental structure that I needed to set up. If it was as simple as that, then I could just do that. But I wouldn't have gotten the contribution from all your other ideas. So for all maybe everybody who watches the video has a certain set of 20 neurons that become more interconnected. But then also everybody who watched the video has a slightly different thing happening for the rest of their brain. Some of them find it funny or don't or whatever. They have different reactions in other ways. So those are not being mapped. And in your case, you may have some totally crazy and very strong reaction that, again, nobody else had. But I'm giving you the part that was consistent across my test study of 10,000 people who all had those 20 neurons more highly interconnected after this experience.
You're saying like if there's like a common firing pattern across a huge population, you can induce that firing pattern in a new person, and maybe they'll have the same sensation. Is that the idea?
I was thinking a little bit less about like the firing pattern and more about like just the stable connections between neurons. But whatever it is that is about whatever the thing in your brain that matters, if I just sort of implant that in you.
I'm saying maybe there isn't a common pattern, no matter how many people you have. Just
there has to be though.
Way more, right?
There has to be some kind of commonality, because we already see like a behavioral commonality in terms of like, oh, like you watched that video, we both know that it included these people. The funny thing about it was this, and we can agree on that behaviorally. So must be some correlated thing that is actually in your brain that allows you to recall the people involved and why the video was funny. So that must be true of everybody at the very least.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure.
But I'm not sure that necessarily follows in like a physical sense. Like I'm thinking, if you zip a text file, it is extremely difficult to figure out how to directly edit the zip file in order to edit the text file that's inside when you unzip it the way you want. I suspect that the computational complexity of that is such that we will never figure it out. I mean, it's unprovable. We're not even close to having the knowledge we would need to really ask the question.
Yeah, but there's a difference between saying it's hard, we don't know how to do it, or it's costly, it would never be worth it, versus like, you just definitely can't do it. Like, what if like winning a war depends on implanting, Inception style, an idea in one guy's brain? Then we take out all the stops, we take 100,000 people, do the whole thing.
Yeah, we shouldn't even bring human considerations into it. It's a question of whether it's tractable or not, I think. I mean, that's where I think tractability has to come into it. It's either exponential or it's polynomial, I guess, is how it works, because we can't predict anything about what human capacity and interests will be. But wait, so what was the disagreement? Oh, just because the sample of 1 million people are all responding to a stimulus the exact same way, does not imply, I don't think, that there's any common structure in them, does it?
Well, it just means that something in their brain. So, again, let's say it's Obama eating a hamburger. That's the video that everybody sees. Whatever has happened in your brain allows you all to agree that that's what the video was about. Obama eating a hamburger. Cool. So there's some structure in your head that embodies that knowledge of the video. So that we know that.
Yeah.
So we don't know what the format of that is. And maybe
Right.
it's hard to figure that out. I doubt that it would be impossible to figure that out because
Format as
generally
in,
betting against people's ability to discover the structure of the brain and how it works.
I'm just suggesting that the program that is causing the experience of Obama eating hamburger, because we're conjecturing that's what's outside the mind. In each mind, that program could be totally different from the other programs that are running in the other minds to create what we're
Yes,
conjecturing is the same experience, right?
but totally different does not mean that there's no understandable structure to the problem. So like we can again just expand it to be more than like 100 people or 10,000 people and just talk about it in the more accurate term is just like this understanding the science of like what happens to a brain and a mind when you consume some media and how does it interact with the software and hardware, and you just like do the requisite effort to get really good at this and understand it. And I don't think it's not understandable. I agree that it might be like you might need a computer the size of Jupiter to do this. Maybe it's like that computationally intensive, right? But then you go build a computer the size of Jupiter. It's like one of those almost like things of impossible is such a strong word, where that's the at least the trouble that I have. So anyway, you like figure out the science of this thing, and then you figure out, okay, what is the end result in a person's brain, and then you do that process for the new person, and you then just go and figure out how to, whether it's through surgery or some other means, implant that end result of the difference in the brain state, whether it's this neuron has connected to this other neuron, or this neuron is
Yeah.
like slightly stronger, this neuron has more potassium, whatever, like, and then you start from there. You start that person back up, or I don't even know if you ever anesthetize them or something, but yeah.
I think one question is, could you do this activity short of simulating their brain? Because if you can simulate their full brain, then all bets are off. You can just see what happened and then reproduce that in the original brain. So that you can do. One question is, though, whether you can implant this memory that you want to implant without just fully simulating their brain and giving them the experience and then seeing what happened in their brain and then just copying that over. It could be, I think maybe it's helpful to think of like a spatial analogy or like just a real world thing where it's like, okay, different countries will generate electricity and deliver it to people who need it. And so you could say at that very high level, there's a country and they have customers and they have electricity producers. Okay, and they need to be connected. But they could all do that quite differently, and their terrain could be different. And one involves tunnels, the other one involves this or that. And so there could be potentially quite sophisticated differences between how all these different countries connect their power producers and their power consumers. And so when you say, hey, I want to connect power consumers and producers, you might say, oh, that's like what we said before, connecting the Obama neuron to the hamburger neuron. But in any given country, who knows what their terrain is? And so that maybe leans more towards Zach's point about it could be difficult. Because you could land in somebody's brain with this weird terrain and say, actually, it's not clear. Or you could take arbitrarily long a period to study how their terrain works and connect things up in the right way.
Yeah, I'm worried. Yeah, full VR will not be so easy, though, because the VR system will have to learn. But yeah, we'll have to like map the entire brain in order to figure out which stimulus causes which experiences.
I
Maybe
think maybe you could do full VR in normal time, because you just have to map the inputs. You can figure out where, this sensation on your skin maps to some response in your brain. The harder part would be inserting a memory without, that is like what would have happened had they or like to make them think they experienced it without a live VR session.
I wonder if there's like just a long calibration process that is necessary. Like if we think in terms of the VR, you can just have it set up and you can figure out how to do it. And maybe the same with memory. You can have a person remember certain things or have certain experiences and see the connections that they have, and then they have a unique way of editing their neurons directly to insert certain things. But it just takes a long
Yeah, I
calibration
guess
process.
maybe with a long calibration process with a willing subject, where it's like, think about hamburgers, think about Obama, think about eating, think about restaurants,
Mhm.
and maybe you could eventually map these things.
Right, but to
Yeah.
Carlos's point, I think there maybe there mustn't be, but I think there must be some generalization. Perhaps we'll be, very far away from figuring out how it generalizes, but there must be some type of overlap in some way to at least some people. Maybe it's not even all people, but maybe there you can figure out how one person works, and then you can do similar things, and it works for their brother, and it works for people in their in their neighborhood, but it doesn't work for anybody else who's lived a slightly different life. Maybe there's something like that, but there has to be some level of generalization. At least I think.
Yeah. I'm actually changing my opinion on this. Yeah, I've been realizing now. I think it comes down to like the extent in which creativity is involved in making that memory. So like if it's a extremely creative process where it's like, okay, the Obama eating the hamburger really reminds this person of their brother eating the hamburger in the same way. You're just not going to get that out of the other samples, right? So you're screwed. Um, and if they think about that joke quite a bit and it like, becomes this big thing in their mind, you're not going to get that either. So, and I do feel a little bit like running the simulation of the person literally is kind of like cheating a little bit. So insofar, and you can't like, you have to run creativity. You can't like predict in advance what the outcome of creative processes are going to be. So insofar as creativity is involved in making the memory after consuming the media, that part you have to just run that person's creativity to get the outcome. But if it's like, I don't know, I feel like I can think of stuff where, I don't know, like I know where my passport photo is, but like I feel like that's a very uncreative fact in my mind where I'm like, okay, I just need to track these documents so I know where they are. But like you could very easily change the neurons or whatever. So I think it's like in some other place. I don't know. That's my feeling, but I could be wrong in that
Interesting.
everything is creative. Um,
I think that you might be able to. It'd be interesting if you could not insert anything that's creative at all, but you'd only be able to insert things that are extremely, extremely foreign to all people, so that it doesn't, in obvious ways, interact with the rest of your memories or the rest of the knowledge that you have. But
yeah.
and those types of things could be generalized, but anything else that references anything that's familiar would not be able to generalize.
Here's one
I
thing
could see something like that.
Here's one thing that would be interesting is like, what if our minds had to work a bit more like our immune system? Like imagine a world where like, right now, nobody can really mess with your brain. Like just nobody knows how to. But imagine a world where they could. Then you might have to have defenses that could tell like, was this thing inserted into my brain or did I think it? Because the things that I think end up connected to everything in a certain way. And maybe there's a way of saying like, hey, I remember this thing, but like, I don't remember having any opinion about it or whatever.
This is
That's weird.
literally the plot of Inception.
What's that? Is that,
Yeah.
that
I'm
is?
just saying it's literally the plot of Inception, where they undergo training to prevent Inception from happening. And there, anyway, but it continues. It's just funny.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
I'm forgetting it and they already answered all these questions.
Yeah, I forgot about that. There's a plot point where, the executive that they're trying to incept something in,
Yeah.
unbeknownst to them, has gone through training to have like subconscious defenses that are looking for, foreign actors
Yes.
mind, which is super cool.
Yes. You should write the script for the next movie, Carlos. You
think
independently
Tyler is better
invented the
placed,
first
but-
movie.
I'll collab with Tyler if he wants me.
Sure.
Nice.
I got one project to finish though. You will all hopefully be the first to read my fiction when it's finally done. Now I'm super excited to hear some reactions.
Nice.
You'll all understand, I think. Yeah, this is all. I'm feeling a bit sad that VR may be way, way harder than we hope it is, because that's a major plot point in my story. But that it's the question of that training process. I thought about that too. Like, you have to do trial and error in a mind to see how it reacts to any given stimulus, because there's no way to map it in advance. And maybe that calibration process would just be horrifying because you have to go through like tons of different combinations of possible things happening at once. I don't know.
Like to detect intrusions, or is that what you're talking about?
I mean, to give any given person a program that can induce any environment they want, the program has to learn how that mind reacts to anything so that it can create anything. There's not just like a general purpose. Here's the tree program. The tree program will be maybe highly dependent on whatever mind we're trying to induce the experience in.
Like
So
it,
you
it
might-
depends on how distributed it is. If it's in the pattern of weights of a million or of like 20 neurons, maybe you could map it. But if it's in the pattern of weights of a trillion neurons, there are a trillion squared weights.
Yeah, and I mean, in general, any experience will be super tangled up, I think. But
Well, there's two different worlds you can think of. One of them is taking what we currently have as brain architectures and like hooking up into them differently. David Friedman likes to call that like the dream problem. It's like we already enter VR every night, and so we have all these existing networks of information coming into the brain, and so we could just say, hey, the inputs to those, we'll cut them off where they exist now and put digital versions in until you have the current experience you're having, but we'll be making that on a CPU somewhere. So that's one kind of thing. And I think that doesn't run into these problems of like connecting to your brain in some weird way. We just take
Yeah,
what
I agree.
exists and replace the inputs. However, there's a second world where you say, well, that we have inputs for sight and all these existing pathways, but what if we want to invent new ones? What if we want to have a 4-dimensional vision? Like how do you make that happen and not make you go crazy or have it be functional? And what if you want to do it more like a mathematician's virtual reality, which is not maybe spatial, but more conceptual? How do you kind of hook into that in a useful way? Or does that even make sense? So you could start moving beyond what we already know works. And in that case, you might run into situations where you're trying to produce new realities, new experiences, new qualia, and finding that you're maybe not having success or it's not trivial success. Like a bunch of crazy people.
I have to jump in and say that it's not that we enter VR every night when we dream. It's just that the VR changes from being what it is now, which is like we conjecture highly contingent upon reality. It goes being, much less contingent upon reality, but we're never not in virtual reality, right?
Yeah.
To some extent, do we do that with a cochlear implant?
I don't know, I'm not familiar.
Like I think that they feed
Headphones.
signals into your nerves. And basically your brain eventually learns how to interpret those signals.
Cochlear is an ear thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And it's I saw a TikTok about this that was pretty I was very surprised. It was like, I don't know if this is true or not, but apparently you can like play music via Bluetooth. Like it's not just as a hearing aid, you can just like straight up stream data to it. And they were talking about how they don't have to worry about forgetting their headphones on an airplane. And I was like, that's crazy. I did not know technology was there yet, but I'm glad it is.
Oh, so it's actually inside the skull or what?
So there's a small part that vibrates that I believe is like inside. I don't know about inside the skull, but definitely under the skin.
Right.
Then there's a piece that also I think sits outside it, which is because I was like, how do you charge that? But I believe the thing that's charged, the battery, is like not inside. It's just a small vibrating thing that's inside the face, I guess. I don't know. Head.
No noise cancellation though.
Doubt it. Yeah. I mean, you can just turn the implant off for that, but maybe I don't know.
I mean, like airplane noise.
Oh, true.
Oh wait, so is it bypassing the whole ear? Or no, it's just causing sounds.
I think it's just bone conducted sound.
Yeah. Okay.
By the way, as our like ability to affect the brain increases, then the ability for adversarial effects of the brain increases, and so you'll need to have more defenses. So it's like, yeah, it is weird to think about the idea that like right now, nobody can do Inception on you. It's just nobody knows how to do that. But then, you can imagine a world where somebody does manage to do the version of hacking into your computer, but it's your actual mental brain, and you're like, okay, that's intense world. But then again, somebody can break into your house with a bat, and that'll affect your brain too. So like, it's not totally different from where we are now.
I've seen
Eventually, all terrorism will be software based.
a thing
What's that?
they've I've seen a thing that they've experimented with. It's a device you wear on your back, and you have a camera. It's for blind people, and it makes a low resolution image and like presses on your back the shape of the image it makes. And people can learn to essentially treat that like seeing.
That's cool.
There's another one I know of that's similar. It's there's like a something that points to magnetic north. It's like a belt, and it vibrates towards magnetic north.
Oh.
And people can, after you wear it for long enough, you just incorporate it as a new sense. So you just always know where magnetic north is, but it doesn't feel like vibration anymore. It's just like it feels like a new sense.
Yeah.
Feels like a new sense or a nuisance.
Yeah. I got to get one of those. I'm always wondering where magnetic north is.
I read about this, that people who wear it for a while can take it off and they still have a good sense of direction.
Interesting.
Like, because basically, they constantly have this feedback, as they walk around and go around corners and stuff, which way true north is. And they just get better at remembering where true north is by always having this feedback. And then eventually they don't need it as much anymore.
Oh,
That's cool.
And I'm just wondering, because similarly to how Carlos was just saying that we will need new safeguards against inception once it's developed, and then even more after it gets, say, cheap, we would probably need some kind of laws to deal with like the creation of people. Because if you can create a backup of yourself, there's definitely going to be people that are like, well, why should I just make backups? Why can't I just straight up make clones of myself and then have an army of people that I can, we can all do our bidding together? But then if this kind of gets out of hand, you've just created a bunch of people who, like, if we have human rights and like a welfare state and so on, we will need to provide for, because they will need resources to survive. And it might just be like, we might want to have like, I don't know, some things of like, you gotta, I don't know, sign a form or something before you can just go create new people. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah. I think it's just expensive, because if you are using a computer and you have an AI that uses all the resources of a computer, it's going to have a certain amount of, compute, test time, compute, whatever you want to call that. And if you have a second AI on the same computer, you're going to have half of the resources. And then you're also going to have half of your money and half of the wealth. And then if you have an infinite amount of them, you're cooked. Okay, your processing is not going to work. So, there's just a matter of how much it costs to have multiple different clones of a person running on a computer.
There's in the world, by the way, there's a like a civilizational operating system. And so they you actually can't hurt anybody else physically in their reality, because the operating system level prevents you from doing that unless somebody disables their sort of little shield, So just at this very low civilizational level, you have these safeguards. So I could imagine that also being true for like the creation of people is sort of managed. And maybe that's a question for like anonymity and crypto and whatever else, to think about civilizational architecture for, managing the creation of new people and all that.
Yeah, that was my grand finale point in my Rushed Ratfest presentation. Anyone remembers, like, yes, we will need rules for that, but how do you guarantee that people will adhere to the moral and legal agreements? Eventually, anyone can just bring thousands of people into being, disconnected from the internet, and subject them to horrible things.
I guess
about that?
Another thought is it could be really hard to copy people for the same thing. Can we map a neuron pattern into a functional equivalent that describes their personality? or is the only way to say simulate a person is to simulate all the atoms in their brain, which would be incredibly expensive.
Yeah, it might be way, way harder to copy a person than to just grow a new one. I could definitely see that being true. But I don't think it would be that hard to instantiate tons of new people once we know how. So this
Yeah,
seems like a threat.
because figuring out the thing to put on the hard drive is like a one-time cost, and once you've done that, you've like mapped the person to bits on a computer. Then copying that is super easy. You just like literally copy from your hard drive. Yeah, I can just imagine, because it's like I agree with what you said, Zachary, about the resources, but that's almost kind of precisely the problem, where you could have someone who like rents a big computer for like 24 hours, then makes like 1,000 people on that computer, and now they can't afford to continue paying the rent for that computer. So now the state or whatever has to provide compute so that these people don't die. And it just I don't know, it just feels like, I'm guessing people wouldn't do that, but it would just be like a
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't want to give away too much from my story now, but hoping people won't do that is not a good defense against something that even a single person, take the limit of this problem. One person can cause, 1,000 holocausts per second. That's a serious problem that I see all civilizations having to contend with. And, we can't just, a wing and a prayer is not enough. We have to do something rather dramatic physically, I think. And
Well-
I'll leave it at that, but this is a serious open question as I see it.
well, I guess I'm like, I don't know, maybe I'm being naive, but I'm slightly less concerned that people will oppress the digital people that they're creating, mainly because that is like a thing that takes effort, right? And you have creative entities that are going to try and to not be oppressed. And it's kind of like, just for your evil cruelty, you're consuming a whole bunch of effort and resources on your part to keep these people alive. Whereas the thing that I'm worried about is precisely the fact that you can, I don't know, somehow just not have to worry about that. You just like do this thing the one time, and then everyone else has to bear the cost, I guess.
I mean, that's an interesting type of like terrorist attack where you break into a data center and create 1 million people and then leave.
Right, right,
To
right.
that company to having to deal with. So it's-
Yeah.
But then
I don't
again,
know what-
it could be turn out that like if they've only existed for like a picosecond, that you're like, okay, you activate all the backups for a picosecond, but everybody kind of agrees that if that happens, it's okay to kill a picosecond of me because that's all you're actually doing, because
Yeah.
or something. But
Still sucks for the picosecond you though. But yeah.
maybe, or maybe you say, oh well, okay, fuck, we have to spend $1 billion reintegrating you and your picosecond of experience, whatever, and anyway. But I think one thing that's interesting to ask in all these sci-fi scenarios is about in which ways they are like and unlike the present situation. Because I think at one point I was tweeting about like the idea of like the Star Trek transporter and its potential problems, which have much to do with cloning and this kind of stuff and the creation of new people. It's kind of the same set of things. And I think David Deutsch was replying that like, oh, like the various problems you raised about the creation of new people, damage along the way as you're being transported, those are all problems today. The details are different, and in some cases the details are quite different enough that they require quite a different response maybe. But like the core idea of, hey, you created people and you didn't, and now you're having problems and they're suffering as a result of what you did. All these kinds of things are problems today. So I think whenever we come up with a sci-fi scenario, I think it's also good to kind of take a hardcore look at the existing legal system and cultural setup and say, oh, okay, where is the actual line of novelty here? Because usually the whole situation is definitely not new. And a lot of the existing legal rules would handle that. Like, if you got somebody in your basement, like that's a problem. Somebody finds out about that, you're going to jail. Like that's always been true. So that's not new, but it might be the case that obviously, like, oh, like, whoa, you had a computer there, and now there's a person in that computer, and how do we track that?
Right.
So that's a different kind of question. But that's also true for a lot of things. Like there's this question of like ultimately for society to go well, you really is in their heads. That's where most of the work happens, and then you have a few things on the edges, cleaning up the criminals and applying some pressure for people who don't have the right ideas. But for the most part, it's a good culture that keeps things going well. I think what is it that the capitalists say, or like there's this good quote about like socialism works in a world where like everyone is an angel. And then like capitalism works where, as long as everyone isn't a devil or something like that. Yeah. I think there's a version of that somebody said like, what kind of resources would it take to like keep society functioning if people, if like what fraction of people, what fraction of people with bad ideas could you handle? In other words, like, so what if everybody started throwing things in the street? Like at what fraction of people doing that does like society cease to function, or the costs become so great where just like literally everybody's just throwing refrigerators in the street and thinks it's fine? It's like, okay, well, if one person does that once a year, okay, that's annoying, but we can deal with it. But if everybody's doing it, literally everyone, just like consistently, first it's 8 o'clock in the morning, time to put my refrigerator in the street. Hi, neighbor, you're doing the same thing. Okay, well, then we're gonna have a hard time maintaining transportation infrastructure.
Yeah. Civilizational chaos capacity.
Yeah.
Tyler, I'm wondering what you think about David Deutsch at some point said that there are numbers that are horribly immoral. I'm sure you've heard that before, right? I'm wondering what you think of that, like in terms of if we have, you said a million people Holocaust, in terms of on a hard drive. Any hard drive could be converted into a string of, ones and zeros, and then that could be further decoded into a particular number. And then even that could be, converted into an equation to get to that number. Are those, in your mind, are they different? Having the hard drive, is that different from having the number? Is that different from having the equation to make the number? If it's, 5 times 3 plus pi or whatever,
It's a funny statement, but like no individual number or assembly of information has an intrinsic meaning. So you produce a number. There's an integer that corresponds to fully encoding the entirety of what was Mein Kampf. Okay, so you could encode that in a string of bits. You could invert the string of bits and make a different number. You could perhaps produce any number of sufficient length that encodes Mein Kampf according to your weird scheme. So all the numbers are Mein Kampf. If you
I thought the idea is that some numbers are people having experiences if they're were run by a Turing machine or something.
But the part that I think is that they have to be run, and I believe that earlier you were mentioning that the running part doesn't matter. Right. So if you have the hard drive and it's not running, to me that seems equivalent to having the number, which is not instantiated on a hard drive, which is not running. But from what we were talking about earlier, having the hard drive and not having it actually running is already bad, which would mean that having the number without it being on a hard drive without it running is also already bad.
So like is this argument that for any number of sufficient length that it contains enough information to have a program to run a person, there exists some Turing machine that could run it as a simulation of a person. So in some sense, any number is the program for a person given the right Turing machine.
There's two different issues here. One of them is about the relationship between like information and meaning. Any number can mean anything depending on how the interpreter works. That's one kind of thing. That's what I was saying. I think Zachary is saying, okay, what about information at rest versus computation in motion? That's a interesting distinction there. But I think those two are different issues. So.
Yeah.
Well, I think his point is that because of that, it's only in motion that it matters. because the first one, any
Yeah.
bit of information is all bits of information, uh,
Yeah.
because you could, in principle, construct a computer to run it that way.
But
Mm.
there's different kinds of bad in the world, infinitely many different kinds of bad. One kind of bad is, oh, this theory written on this piece of paper is false. And actually, it's encoding a moral theory that is immoral. And if you followed it, you'd be a bad guy. So that's Mein Kampf at rest. And then there's Hitler doing his thing in motion. And they're bad in different ways. One is having physical consequences and suffering, and the other one is just intrinsically, morally and just logically wrong. But those are different kinds of evils.
So the question was, is it bad to have? Oh wait, we're saying any number could be interpreted in a way that it induces a suffering experience. I'm not sure that's true.
You could have a world where, to reinterpret Mein Kampf as like a good book might take you to say, like, put this H in position number 2 over here. It'll be a complicated and quite arbitrary program, but you can write such a program to rearrange all the letters in Mein Kampf to whatever else you want. They're just letters, but so you can certainly do that.
But Zachary, what was your original question about immoral numbers and the hard drive? And
Well, just said the step that you said that we could have a hard drive that has, a horrible moral event happening, and we can have separately, you said at a different time, that we can have a person on a hard drive and not have it running, and that person is still a person, right? So combining those together, meaning that we would have a hard drive that is not running, that has a horrible moral thing going. And then I took the further step to convert that hard drive to the ones and zeros and just have that separate. And is that the same? And then, a further step, convert the ones and zeros to decimal and then just have a number. And then you can, do any type of arithmetic to, do the prime factorization to have a simple equation to get the number, to get the binary, to then put it on a hard drive. Are all of those bad? From your perspective,
I think everything there is consistent. If there's a person, however they're encoded, then that's a person. If they're having a bad experience, then let's have that not happen if we can, but not by destroying the hard drive with the person on it. That's probably not a good solution. You destroy the parts of the hard drive with the bad experience, then maybe that's the moral thing to do. So I think I understand, and I think that's all consistent, unless I'm just not seeing the contradiction, and there is a contradiction. Was there one?
Yeah.
No,
Well,
I don't think there's actually a contradiction. It's just a weird conclusion, and
Yeah.
I'm not particularly trying to push a point, because I do have the opposite position, but I'm not trying to push mine. But
Okay.
I just think that it is a weird conclusion, and it's an interesting conclusion too, and not that it's a bad conclusion.
Huh.
So
Well,
I think that
okay, go ahead.
part of it is that you could argue that any hard drive of sufficient size containing any data could be a backup of a person with the right program.
Right.
Yeah.
And so to
I mean,
some extent, it only matters in the running of the program. So like it has to be some kind of dynamical process that causes things to happen
Mhm.
that the badness exists in.
Yeah, you don't even need the sufficient amount of data. Like any amount, you can have any number and you can construct a Turing machine that takes in that number and produces suffering, right? But wait, so Tyler, I'm surprised by, like, if a person is like backed up, but there's no program that's running and they're just bits on a hard drive, I do think there is a meaningful sense in which they are not a person. But this is similar to when someone's sleeping, they might not be conscious, so that doesn't mean they're necessarily not a person. Like they might be technically not a person because maybe nothing's running, right? If they're not dreaming, it's like actually inert, or if they're under anesthesia. But the context of the situation is like you should treat this thing that's not a person as a person nonetheless. So I think that's the thing that Zachary I forgot all of the different claims in the chain of claims being made, but that's the part that I would have a different opinion on, which is like, unless there's a program running, there is no person. A person is a running program. You can have the program itself, but it's not running. And in certain contexts, you might want to treat that as if that's a person, depending on the situation. But yeah, for someone to be a person, there has to be a program running. Yeah.
It could be context dependent, and then we have all these exceptions and things, but I thought it was a question of capability. Like, could it be once run, would it be a person? Then it's just a frozen person and a frozen, you can't just kill frozen people. So I felt like that was
Good quote.
consistent. But now it sounds like
No, well, okay, so
any string can be turned into a person if you run it the right way, and so then anything is a person. So that's where it gets fuzzy, I guess.
consider this thought experiment where I think it would be okay to delete the person that's on the hard drive because they aren't running, right? Let's say you have this backup situation where daily backups are made, and you say that I'm going to, every day when I make my new backup, delete a backup that's more than 30 days old,
Yeah.
right? Because you already have the backup. So, sorry?
No, go ahead. I think you should not do
Yeah.
that. I think.
Okay,
Not-
interesting, because I'm not sure I see a problem with that. It's similar to me to taking the transporter in Star Trek, where
Yeah.
you're being deleted in one place, but you show up in another place, so you're fine with that if you believe in the
Yeah.
efficacy of the transporter.
I guess
yeah.
the question depends on if you run that backup at all. Like if every day you make a backup of yourself that lives in a simulated environment for 30 days until you delete it.
Yeah, the moment
Well-
you run it, then all bets are off for me. Like,
Okay.
then that's a person
And
that has
then if
rights.
you start to run it and then pause it, you've sort of still created that person
Yes.
in the running of it, even if you have temporarily suspended them.
Yes, they're
But the having never run,
yeah.
is the
Even then,
difference.
like in some cases, even if you've never run it, if it's the only backup, it would be immoral to delete it. But the context can be different where it is more okay to delete it. But yeah,
I still think pausing being okay for deletion must not be correct, because you could be, say you're running and someone pauses you and they say, oh, well, they're paused. See ya. It's like, but wait a minute. From my perspective, that was just
it
pausing.
depends on if it's the only copy.
Well,
I think
there's
there's also-
different things. Here's where I think you have to like zoom out and say it's more open ended than we realize, because there's like a whole notion of property rights. And I think David Friedman, the economist, points out that like property rights aren't at all obvious. Like sometimes we like to treat them like it's obvious. Like if it's my property, it's mine. And if it's yours, it's yours. But he's like, actually, it's much, much more sophisticated and than that, because it's like
context dependent.
different things. He points out like there's a world in which you'd say like, hey, if you point a high-powered laser at my front door, like you're violating my property rights. But it's like if you turn on your nightlight, you're doing the same thing, just lower intensity. At what point am I deciding that you're violating or not violating my property rights? And this is a culturally adjudicated thing where we say, well, dude, if we had to like put a wall between all of our, you couldn't shine a light on me, we'd all be worse off. So fuck it, like I'm not bothered by that. But there's no single simple equation that says that tells you all of those types of trade-offs across the whole economy.
It's all just argument. So what is the argument for the pause kill?
I think that not that I think your argument is wrong. I'm fine with the argument so far, but I think the analogy doesn't hold, because if you pause a regular person, the knowledge is still instantiated in their body. So the knowledge has already been instantiated. Like the fact that their body exists or the brain exists is an instantiation of the knowledge. Whereas with a computer program with bits, the knowledge has not been instantiated in any sense. None of the knowledge has been instantiated. So I think there's a slight difference in the analogy there that falls apart. But otherwise, I'm still along with you in terms of if you just think that having a string of bits and deleting it is bad, then okay, fair enough. But I just think the analogy doesn't hold.
I guess also kind of
the
going.
bits are always in a physical medium. There's no way of storing bits without a physical
If-
medium. So,
If say you have a digital person of some sort that runs, then you pause it and make a whole bunch of copies of that paused person, and then delete all but one of those copies and start running it again, you have not in any sense killed that person.
Right, you killed a bunch of-
Because none of those paused copies ran. If you delete the last one, then you have.
Yeah, I think it's a one-way thing. Like, if you've created a person, you cannot destroy them now. I mean, you can see how that have. Surely it can't be right to just be creating people, not running them, and destroying. I guess that's begging the question.
Yeah.
I think they must run for some amount of time
Yeah, but
in order to gain personhood.
I think
By
you have
that
to
reasoning-
step back a little bit from all that and say, like, suppose that you have to look at also the consequences of these things. Like, suppose that we would all be 1 billion times richer if we said, hey, dude, if you accidentally run my little backup for like a picosecond, nobody gives a shit, because like, and it's just not the right world we want to live in. The same way that if you shine a light from your house into mine that's very pale, I don't really care. Like, we'd all be worse off if we had this particular rule. So like at some point you're saying, hey, there's different kinds of suffering that can occur, and we're going to have these trade-offs between them. And, you know, no world is perfect. You know, there's that whole discussion to be had about like, okay, well, propose a legal rule that says you cannot delete a copy of a backup ever. Okay, well, that has other follow-on consequences. And if we don't like them, we'll probably change our view of what the right trade-off is there. So the trade-off is the key thing to have in mind in all these discussions. Not just an intrinsic, like, oh, you know, something categorical. This is totally wrong by definition. I don't know if you can say that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Can I clarify something? So like, I think context is huge here. The same way an act can be moral in one context and be immoral in another one. For example, pushing someone is generally immoral, but if you push them out of the way of a bus that's going to hit them, then that's moral. So given that disclaimer, in general, I would say even pausing a person is immoral. Like, you, without their consent especially, shouldn't do that. That being said, the same way, if you, so first of all, I guess is another question we can put aside, but like, do you buy the transporter thing where it's like, if you knew it worked perfectly, would you use it as a method of transportation? Or do you think it would mean killing yourself and a new person gets created that isn't you, that continues on Mars or whatever?
Yeah, I would probably do it. I wouldn't be worried about continuity being broken or something like that, because I think that the new person would just be me. But yeah, if the original person is being destroyed, then I still think that's concerning morally. Seems
You
like.
guys seen The Prestige?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with the twist, but I haven't seen it, so please don't explain it.
I
too
mean,
much.
so
I think I get it.
I think, I don't know, I think it would
We'll
take me
actually
some
explain
effort.
it and then erase it from your brain.
But I think there's an equivalence between like stepping into the transporter and being okay with the paused backup that has never been run being deleted. Like say when you go through the transporter, someone records the bits while they're in motion, so that bit is enough to reconstruct you, so that counts as a backup of you. But then if someone just never ever runs that backup and then deletes it, after a while, like, no new person has been created, one person's life has not been disturbed, it's like kind of all fine and dandy almost. But this is not, I can do better with the analogy, but like, I don't know if it's already convincing or not.
Say the transporter isn't really a transporter, it's a copier. Creates a copy on Mars, and inside the box is an incinerator.
Yeah, I feel like that's not
That-
good.
The suffering, of being incinerated is the problem.
Minus that, it just makes it more visceral. So yeah, I mean, it obliterates a person, but then recreates an extremely similar person.
However, you're not taking into account this possibility. Like, what if the incinerator is like really cool? Like, it's like molten metal and it's like Terminator. Like, you're like, holy shit, I just transported myself to Mars via like a atomic bomb. That's badass.
Yeah, something still feeling some sort of instinct about the has been run idea. Like there's some, what if we don't know if the program has been run? We have a frozen person program here, and we really need to see, we want to clear this hard drive. Like, well, has it been run or not? Like, well, what does that matter? Is a person on ice? Who cares what experiences they had? They have all these memory. Something seems amiss there. I mean, maybe each new instance of me has not been run before. It's just, the frozen state, and then there's like each new instance of computation. I don't know. Something seems missing here, but I don't know if I put my finger on it.
I agree with you. I think you're right. Like, so if you just find a person on a hard drive that is not being run and you don't know what the intention was, it's the moral thing to do to, take that to the police office, and then maybe they can give that person a body and ask them what the fuck was going on and like how they found themselves in the middle of the desert. But the point the point I'm trying to make is like, when all of the intentions are known, and this is like a daily backup type situation, you're not infringing on any creativity, any error correction, any progress that's going to be made by like not running the program that was saved on the backup or deleting the program. Because I don't know, that's what makes me, I'm not saying I'm 100% on here, but
I'm
like,
not,
I don't feel
I'm not dead set one way or the other now either. So my thought experiment now would be, you find a hard drive with a person on it, and you think, I'm going to destroy it, but then you learn it had been running, it ran for 4 seconds 10 years ago. It's like, oh, now I can't destroy it. It's like, what difference does that make? It seems like it's the information that's present, not what has happened historically.
Right, and if there's the same, like if you have two copies and one of them ran and the other one did not run, but they're the exact same information, what's the difference?
That's a much better version of my thought experiment. Why does
I guess none of us have the experience of being a digital person.
Actually, we do.
I think there's no distinction. There's no such thing as a digital person in some sense. I mean, unless
I just say that that it's not digital versus analog or anything like that. It's more about evolved versus designed objects, and our mind being one of them. Our minds are not designed, but they are evolved, and otherwise they just store information the usual way.
A big difference is a world where people are copyable.
Yeah.
That
sorry, I'm just thinking
a very
about
different
it.
world. And you get into issues of, when is somebody a different person? Does 1 second of running a copy make them a different person from you?
I think they're already different.
So this is again where I would think about the trade-offs and so on, and like you did say, okay, well, are you like legally required to like merge with somebody or like provide that option? Things like that. That would I think would happen.
What is merge with someone without their consent, and then we're both one person? Then what happens? Who's angry? No one to be.
I guess there's probably gonna have to be, like, if this happens, there's gonna have to be rules in a world with finite resources. There is some extent of, you should try to save someone's life if you can, but not at any cost.
Yeah. So what are the reactions to Zachary's version 2 of my version 1 hard drive?
The thing that is at the heart of it, like Carlos is using the phrase, think about the trade-offs. I would use the phrase like, is someone's problem solving being sabotaged? Is someone's error correction being sabotaged? Is someone's creativity being sabotaged? It's not the thing that, oh, this one hard drive ran for 10 seconds 10 years ago, so therefore it means more and is better than this other hard drive that didn't run, even though they're basically the same. It's like, okay, what is the context of the situation? And I think the thing that is important about not running the hard drive, and I do think that if you run it for like 1 second, that is bad, but it's not as bad as like running it for a year and then pausing it, right? Because then the new person has changed, they've developed their goals more, and this kind of this same thing going on. And that is the thing that result, like there's no clear answer. It falls back to the context in the thought experiment that you gave. And like do the least problem solving sabotagey thing.
One thing I think that's helpful when doing any kind of moral analysis is to kind of maybe see what kinds of questions should you be asking and answering. Like one of them could be like, is action X correct? Is it moral? That's one kind of question that is often asked. But like there's a separate question, which is more like what you're saying, which is, okay, in this situation, there are these options that exist. Which option should you take, given your criteria for selecting among them? And so in this case, when thinking about the future, you can say a moral discussion can do a few different things. It can like invent new situations with new problems. Like you can invent new options. Like if you have never thought of copying or merging, like the idea of merging two people, like that's an invention. If you hadn't thought of that, then it wouldn't be an option. But if it is an option, maybe it's the ideal option. And then lastly, what are the criteria for deciding among things? Like maybe if you're like, it doesn't hurt anybody, like no one is having a new experience that is bad as a result of this action. That's one criteria. Or you could say, actually, one thing that really matters is the destruction of knowledge. Not the destruction of one copy, but it's wiping off of any copy. If there's only one copy and you destroy it, that's a destruction of knowledge in a way that if you destroy 10 copies out of 1,000, you're not destroying the information intrinsically. So that's a thing to pay attention to. So trying to figure out what are the measuring sticks here? What are the criteria? What are the situations that you might want to deal with? What are possible operations that would be options to you when you face that situation? And all of that is like a moral contribution.
Yeah, it's very much like a courtroom type. The answer is to figure it out, basically, by argument. There may not be a universal prescription, but yeah, so the criteria of interfering with someone's problem solving is an interesting one. Now I'm wondering though, if you have a person and they pause for unknown reasons, and the rest of us AGIs in the community say, now Bill has paused. His history doesn't matter. The fact that he was running doesn't matter. It seems like we definitely can't destroy him. Like, but he paused.
Yeah.
Give me those bits. Like that definitely doesn't work.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
it has to do with
this kind of thing. Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but this kind of thing does happen, right? Sometimes people fall into a coma and they're quote unquote like paused. I don't know, it feels bad to say that, but like we take care of them, right? Like it's like, we should put them on life support and do all the treatments to kind of bring them back to their original state.
Because we think they can be unpaused. So that's different. If someone crashes and they're paused, we think there's no way for them to run. I think that's totally different. That's like an end of life discussion, euthanization type situation. Also worth noting that this all is like totally shadowing the abortion debate. No one else has noticed that. I think that's kind of interesting. At some point, an embryo crosses over into personhood, and then all these questions become kind of relevant. So
I guess the other thing I'm thinking about is if like a human person becomes digitized, maybe to them it's worth some risk of being deleted for the opportunity to exist in simulation beyond what would have been their natural life.
Yeah, I would say we're in simulation now again, but it's just a different.
Well, in that case, you're just saying we have this other environment that is not the one you're used to, and you can live in there for a while, and that'd be like living in prison or something. You're like, okay, it's not ideal, but I'll take it, as opposed to just fully axed.
Yeah, I would take that risk, probably, but.
There's another thing that I don't know if this is just nonsense, but I was thinking of like, right now we're talking about people as sort of objects, physical objects and information objects. But I wonder if it's also worth thinking like about people as abstractions. So like, what if you just said, hey, there's Tyler, and we're going to think of this as an abstract entity. And we're not even going to think about any of the bits involved or whatever, Turing machines or any physical systems. We're just like, okay, they're like in the space of possible programs. There's a thing called a Tyler.
There is
your thing. And so that's sort of this more ethereal abstract entity. And then we can have this separate discussion about like, okay, well, independent of any of the physical things, we have these views about this person wants to keep living and whatever. Now let's figure out how do we shuffle reality in its physical terms to like do the right thing. And maybe our duty to the abstract Tyler is to, make sure that if you're in a coma, we restart your hardware so that, you can keep on running. And, because we know Tyler wants to keep on running. And his physical system is not allowing that. And then, likewise, if you have, but I don't know if that gets you anywhere. I don't know if that adds anything to discussion, but I just,
Yeah, I think it's, well, it makes me want to now start exploring the question of abstract versus real, because I still kind of wrestle with that and kind of just think of everything, what's possible exists. And so, this physical instantiation of the abstract Tyler, we're saying it's physical because it has emerged from laws of physics. But I don't know, in some sense, maybe everything is abstract, everything is just possible. And just this is the reemergence of some, ideal, other pure abstract form. But
one counter argument to what I was saying was that only real people exist. Like we can imagine infinite numbers of people that have never existed, and this actually comes up in the case of Richard Dawkins' book, one of his books, where he says, "You and I will die, but that makes us the lucky ones." Like most people who could have existed in terms of most genomes that could exist have never existed. They will never get that chance to even live or die. And I think Deutsch has kind of criticized that and says, well, we don't have a duty to these abstract genomes that have never existed. And by the way, a genome isn't necessarily a person either. And there's critiques of that. So if you start talking too much about abstract people, independent of real people who have physical bodies and so on of some kind, then you might go off the deep end and start talking about, abstract Charlie who has never existed in any form. And we have
it's kind of a constructor theory way of looking at the genes, though. I think Dawkins could at least appreciate that part.
What's the connection?
The constructor theory view of genes is not like what any particular genes generate, but what they could generate.
Yeah, although to some degree you might say almost anything can do almost anything. Like, as you have this bunch of protons here can turn into any other bunch of protons.
I was just wondering.
Given the right knowledge, which is encoded in the gene.
I was just wondering, like, at what point is something, what defines personhood when it comes to like, this could become that, which could become that, which could become that. And it's again kind of the abortion debate, but I guess it's like when it has autonomy. So when no people can interact with the thing and it would develop into a person, then it should not be destroyed. Or is it only once it has already become a person? I don't know. Maybe this is tangential too.
All I know is we better figure this out because we gotta. We have AGIs coming. We can't leave the call until we figure it out. But cool. I think I probably want to wrap it up soon. Anyone have any final quotes they want to put onto the record here about? I think we had some good ones, like a person resting on a hard drive, and I think you had another good one, like you can't just kill frozen people. I like that. So
Episode titles, something.
Yeah, I'm running my title acquisition program as we do this for when I post it.
You can't just kill frozen people. Oh, I tried to look up Age of M, and it's giving me the age of Eminem, the rapper, and I can't have it not do that.
Age of M is EM. Is the way is the title.
I even did. Huh. Oh, that's interesting.
EM for emulation.
Okay.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm trying to find this book on transhumanism, but I just keep getting rappers.
Yeah.
Well, cool.
Yeah, we got a lot of territory.
Hopefully, we can all have this meeting again in a future virtual reality of 20 dimensions as we continue on our immortal lives. But until then, adios.
See you guys.
Yeah, let's listen to you all.